Do I recommend SIPS over timber frame for small building projects, for house extensions and for garden rooms? Let's find out. With timber frame, you order studs and OSB sheets from your local merchants who delivers it like this, and then you, or your joiner, build the frame lying flat, add the OSB sheathing to prevent racking, and then you hoist it up, add insulation in between and over the studs. Now to SIPS, these are panels consisting of 2 layers of OSB with some insulation, and the OSB is glued to the rigid insulation using a pressing machine, and this works together like a big stiff sandwich to create a structural panel that can take loading both horizontally and vertically, just like a timber frame, but a little bit stronger. SIPS are delivered already fabricated as panels, and as opposed to a traditional timber frame panel, there are no intermediate studs within the SIPS panels. Now a quick look on a typical SIPS manufacturer's website and we see a list of a load of advantages that SIPS offer. Amazing, right? Why even bother with timber frame? Let's ignore the usual nonsense and pull out the main advantage points that these companies list that affect us for our home extension projects. Let's start with advantage number 1, build cost through economies of speed of construction. SIPS are faster and therefore cheaper. Advantage number 2, simple logistics through a one-stop off-site manufacturing process. And advantage number 3, running costs and eco-credentials. There are lower annual energy costs for your building because SIPS are super airtight and have much better insulation properties. Now let's use a real world example to see if these claims live up to the hype. And I love the real world. It's such a sobering way of showing up exaggerated claims and sales jargons some marketing person has dreamed up. I have this artist studio to build. We've put the foundations in. This one has mini pile foundations, which I'll talk about in another video. And here's the ground floor frame that will build the wall panels off, which is already in place. And I need to choose between SIPS wall and roof panels and timber frame wall panels and timber roof joists. I'll compare U values and heat efficiency, speed to construct, and of course cost. Let's start with the SIPS panels as our option. Starting with one panel, here's how the construction works for this example. It's an expanded polyurethane core of 122mm, and then we've got 2 11mm sheets of OSB to create a sandwich either side, and note the lack of studs within the panels, and that is a great advantage as there's less route for the cold to travel. However, in order to secure the panels, we need to add 120mm CLS studs to bottom and both sides, along with a load of solvent heavy glue, hardly the stuff that makes this construction eco-friendlier than traditional frame. But we'll get to the eco-friendly bit in a minute. Let's add all the panels, same for the roof, and here's the completed model. And out of the manufacturers who returned a price to me, the cheapest one was this much, plus this much VAT, giving this much as the total. However, we then need to add the transport, installation and assembly done by the SIPS company, which is another chunk, and add the VAT again to that. So we end up with getting on for £13,500 in total. And let's look at timber frame now using the same modelling. We're using 89 by 38 CLS for the wall studs this time. And side note, CLS is great because it's regularised to check out these radiused edges. Studs are at centres of either 400mm, that's 16 inches, or more often 600mm, 24 inches, depending on the loadings that it's going to be carrying, with 11mm OSB to the outside, and between the studs we need to include 70mm PIR insulation to obtain the required U value of 0.18. We need to add 50mm PIR insulation to the outside over the OSB. Here's a dew point calculation of that to make sure there's no chance of any interstitial condensation, any leak moisture gets through. Now for the timber framed roof, it's 170mm timbers with 18mm OSB deck and then 160mm PIR insulation to get us to the required U value, and that's made up in 2 layers. This is a warm roof construction. We need to do this for a like-for-like comparison with SIPS and also comply with building regulations. If you're doing a garden room under permitted development, there are other options to consider, which I've gone through in my video here. where a warm roof isn't possible. And here's a breakdown of all materials for timber frame. I've pulled the quantities directly from the model, and you can see the total cost for this is here. And these aren't estimates, by the way, they are actual costs from my supplier. And then we need to add the labour for us to construct the frame, including the insulation and membrane. And for me and my colleagues to do the walls and roof for something of this scale in timber frame with the floor already in place would take us a couple of days. Let's add a margin of safety of another day, let's say, put it into our costing spreadsheet, and we get this amount. Now from a cost point of view or like-for-like comparison, it's this, and you can see there is a huge difference compared to the SIPS cost. And remember, this is real world and like-for-like, nothing is estimated here. So next we need to step back and decide whether this massive additional cost of SIPS is justified in the advantages that were claimed by the SIPS websites earlier. Off-site manufacturer, on-site speed, and eco-credentials. Let's go with off-site speed first. This is the logistics and advantage you gain from off-site manufacture, and it's the holy grail of construction technology. Currently the in vogue buzzwords, along with the eco stuff, and it involves preparing the drawings and dimensions, sending them off to get prices back, agreeing the detail and the engineering, paying for the hefty additional initial deposit to get the manufacturing underway, and getting a site delivery date with installation set. Now, I get mad when I see fake and exaggerated claims on company websites in the building industry. It just creates a trend of deception that only ends up costing everyone money through wasted time, and especially the person at the end of the chain, the property owner or self-builder. In the case of the SIPS manufacturers, it's embarrassingly awful. I sent off these panel schedules fully dimensioned to make it easy for them to price to 3 separate well-established companies within a 50-mile radius of the project site, and on their websites they all make these claims about off-site speed, and none of them, not one, came back to me. Not even an acknowledgement email, nothing. After 10 days I followed up with phone calls and more emails, and I still heard nothing. 2 out of the 3 of them did not even return the calls, and the third company finally provided a cost, and it gave me a host of conditions where I had to first get my own structural engineer to provide the info prior to sending it to their engineer. So 2 engineers, and then wait for it, 10 weeks, that is 10 from point of order, where you pay your money to delivery. I mean, seriously? When I can get a full timber frame kit of parts for a 3-story townhouse or for an extension for a garden room with fixings, insulation sheets and membrane delivered on pallets to my site from a choice of merchants in a couple of days? Where's the speed in SIPS? Now let's turn to speed of on-site construction, and it's true that since the panels are fabricated off-site, there's less fabrication required, and the only cutting is for studs that are required to join the panels together. To create this shell would be a single day for specialist installers, more if you do it yourself perhaps, as you shouldn't underestimate the time to understand and use the specialist glues along the studs. So we're saving at least 1 but probably 2 whole days of on-site construction by going down the SIPS route. This is a 28 square metre I think studio. A few days doesn't really matter that much, but I imagine 150 square metre house project, for example, the bigger your project, the more time you would save, since the saving is exponential. I would guess on a typical house build you could save up to a week or 2, and that is quite a lot and does make a difference. Let's talk eco, sustainability, carbon neutral, passive house, airtightness, buzzword central. Let's wade through these weeds and get to the facts. The main eco claim SIPS manufacturers make is their incredible insulation properties, and, jargon alert, U value is the way of measuring the rate at which temperature transfers through the fabric. The current U value standard is 0.18 in England and 0.17 in Scotland, the lower the better. A U value of 0.1 is absolutely amazing, and you would almost never need to have your heating on, since heat would escape so slowly. Your human body alone would carry on keeping the place warm. And this 0.1 is to the standard required for a passive house standard, something that originated in Germany and is part of the net zero off-grid sort of stuff. These SIPS panels, they've quoted me return a value of 0.25. So not the 0.1 they were advertising on their website though. In order to achieve 0.1, the wall of the SIPS panel has to be, wait for it, at least 219 millimeters thick. And if you're building the house extension, once you've added in your cavity and your outer leaf of brick and your service zone on the inside for sockets and then plasterboard, you're up at over 400 millimeters of wall thickness. And if we do a U value for timber frame, we see we can achieve the same result for a thickness of this much. It's exactly the same, if not better. Who would have thought? So really these claims are not very accurate from the SIPS manufacturers. For my artist studio, I can't afford to lose an additional 100mm of space. Who could in a small footprint? And the SIPS manufacturer, they realised that as well, and hence they came up with 144mm of wall and the higher U value that doesn't even comply with building regulations. There are a few other things that we need to consider: airtightness and passive ventilation and type of heating, but those make so little difference once you've gotten the fabric down to these standards. So do I recommend SIPS for your projects? Well, maybe for rural, greenfield, new build house plots, countryside sites where space is abundant and clients' pockets are deep, I'll at least consider it. But for the vast majority of house builds in the real world, at this point, no, I do not. Timber frame all the way. Give me a thumbs up if this was useful, and I hope to see you here again.